in the democracy. We asked him, where did you get the money to buy these flats? And then started this whole movement to get him to answer these questions. Now, there was a court case in the end, and in the court he was convicted. But do you know there was a media channel, one of the most powerful media channels, they did everything to protect him. Now, this is not what a media is supposed to do. The media did everything. They covered up for him, not just protecting him. I, who was asking my democratic right a question to asking someone, where did you get the money? I was attacked. Personal attacks. I mean, the sort of attacks I faced, no political leader I challenged, no political leader would have gone through the sort of personal attacks they went, because, you know, they couldn't attack me on my, on integrity, so they went on these personal attacks. So this is not normal for media to do this. Media is not supposed to do this. Media is supposed to be a watchdog, to bring out, you know, play the role of an opposition. But they are not about personal attacks and trying to blackmail you. We just had another case right now. There's a judge who convicted the previous prime minister. Now this judge, the opposition brought out a video blackmailing him about him with some compromising video with some woman. They brought this up. This happens in Italian mafias. It doesn't happen in democracies. So, I mean, you know, sometimes, you know, I firmly believe that eventually we will have to move where the media owners will have to disclose their source of income. You know, just like anyone else, they'll have to say, how much tax do they pay? What is the source of income? Even if you ask them how much tax you paid, some of these media say this is a freedom, it's against freedom of expression.
So looking at it from that perspective versus a censorship regime, but more of a transparency effort is the focus.
And Nancy, accountable media. Media should also be accountable. You know, you can't have a media sort of protecting criminals in a society.
Okay, we're going to move the conversation. Here, there are a number of questions about Afghanistan. I think you've covered that. But here's one specifically asking, how do you view the peace talks about Afghanistan hosted by both Russia and Uzbekistan?
You know, we should really get all the neighbors of Afghanistan involved with the peace talks, because this is, it should be the interest. Pakistan, the United States, and Afghanistan. These three countries today are the most interested in having peace in Afghanistan. But not all neighbors are interested in peace in Afghanistan. Because, you know, for various reasons, people have their own, other countries have their own agendas. So I firmly believe that the US should try and co-opt as many countries as possible. Because there will be people who will be trying to, you know, put a spanner in the works. And so if the neighbors are all involved, there's a much better chance of the talks going smoothly.
And speaking of neighbors, there's a question saying, and you mentioned this in your opening remarks, what role can Pakistan play in easing the rising tensions with Iran and a number of other countries, including the United States, without damaging some of your other relationships? How are you thinking about that?
You see, Pakistan is, you know, we're really indebted to Saudi Arabia, we're indebted to UAE, because the way they came forward, you know, when we were confronted with this, when we took over government, we only had 2 weeks of foreign exchange reserves. So we were staring at a default, and these countries came forward to help us, and so we are really indebted to them. But my worry about Iran is, I'm not sure whether all the countries realize the gravity of the situation if there's a conflict with Iran. People don't understand, you know, this is not going to be the same as Iraq. This could be much, much, much worse. It will have great consequences for Pakistan, adverse consequences for our country. It could unleash terrorism, which people would forget Al Qaeda and those types, because the Iranian, the Shia element in Islam is very cohesive. They have a much greater sense of martyrdom than the Sunni Muslims. The battle might be quite short if it goes ahead and bombing airfields and so on. But the consequences after that, my worry is that not many people fully understand it, and I would strongly urge that there should not be this conflict should not. There should not be another military situation. Pakistan has already suffered. I said, what we went through these last 15 years, the last thing we want is another conflict on our borders. And, we would do anything. I mean, if any role Pakistan can play in this, we have already suggested this to Iran. Until recently, Iran was willing, but then when somehow I felt that Iran is getting very desperate, and I do not think they should be pushed into a situation where this leads to a conflict.
Another question via Twitter. What are some of the concrete steps your government is taking to ensure that the military operates under civilian leadership? Something you alluded to in your earlier comments.
You see, in Pakistan, we had 3 martial laws, and the last one was General Musharraf's. I think General Musharraf's martial law was a watershed in Pakistan, in the sense that there was a opinion across the board that when you have bad democracy, the answer is not to have a military government. Because the military government comes in, it's like curing cancer with disprin. For a while you feel good because they are organized, it's an organized institution. But eventually, you end up in even a worse situation, because then democracy starts all over again. And what we need in Pakistan now is an extended run of democracy. And I really do believe that the democratic evolution of the country has reached a point where now we will go towards further democracy. I mean, us winning the election is who would have thought we would have won an election against these? How many times in a 2-party system has a third party broken through? It's unheard of. I mean, nowhere in the world does a third party break through. We broke through because of social media. We actually, despite the official media sort of not giving us that sort of coverage, all the opinion polls were that we would not make it. But it was the social media and the young people who came out and made us defeat the 2 established parties. And I think the process will keep going on. I think that in Pakistan, people have tasted freedom. They understand, the power of the vote. In fact, social media has actually democratized the whole world. Everyone now has, they have Twitter, everyone can participate.
That's how we're getting questions. Yeah. Well, I have 2 related questions on that I think build on the vision that you just articulated. And the first is, what will the government do to address closing space for civil society, and how does that fit into your vision? And closing space for civil society and activists.
I don't understand. How is the government?
Well, I think
You're closing space for civil society.
There's another question about Gulale Ismail and other activists.
You're talking about PTM. PTM. Yeah, that's PTM.
It's called civil. I think they're saying it's a broader civil society question, but
it's actually related to PTM. Look, all these years I kept saying, when Pakistan I stood up in the National Assembly in our parliament in 2004. I objected to the Pakistan army being sent into our tribal areas. No one understood the tribal areas. The only reason I understood the tribal areas is because some 30 years back, I wrote a book on the tribal areas. I did a travel book. I went all over and I understood the tribal areas. As I said, it is one of the most weaponized per capita area in the world. It's a most devolved democracy. Every village is an independent entity, and so they have never allowed outside interference to come into the tribal areas. So when Pakistan Army was being sent there in 2004, I stood in the parliament, tried to explain to them that the greatest number of losses when the British were ruling India, they suffered the greatest number of losses in Waziristan, which is tribal area. So we should never have sent army there. Whenever you send an army into civilian areas, there are massive collateral damage and massive casualties and destruction. So all the time when I was speaking out against this, I was being called Taliban Khan. I was being called pro-terrorist. General Musharraf, I remember, in a meeting said that I am a terrorist without a beard. And so once this whole thing was over, this young Pashtun movement started. And this Pashtun movement was correct, what they were saying. The area was devastated. The people of the tribal areas, I mean, half of them were internally displaced. Their shops were gone. Most of them relied on livestock. Livestock disappeared. The whole area was, as it is, tribal areas before 2001, 75% of the people were under the poverty line. So after this military action, they even went further down. So we had this young movement and movement stemming out of anger, and they, of course, they blamed the Pakistan army for all the devastation there. And we've just had elections in the tribal area now. We've just had, first time in Pakistan's history, the tribal area has been assimilated with Pakhtunkhwa, a province. And first time we've had election, and I'm very pleased to say that PTI won the election. But we have now injected the greatest amount of money in the tribal areas to develop it. Never has so much money been allocated for development there. But you know, the reason why there were problems was that the PTM leadership started attacking the army. And they kept attacking the army, and the last thing happened was that they actually, civilians charged an army post, there were few people killed, and that's why there were restrictions. But now it's settling down because we've had a peaceful elections in the tribal areas. So I think we will now move on.
Yeah, I think the question was probably triggered a bit by the New York Times article about the harassments and arrests of this Gulali Ismail family and friends.
I wish that they would, the New York Times would also take the other point of view. Now I'm sounding like President Trump.
So we have time for just a couple more questions. The U.S. has been asking Pakistan to do more in the context of terrorism. It relates a little bit to what you were saying. They particularly were asking Pakistan to do more in the context of GEM. And after the arrest of Hafiz Saeed, is this it? Will he stay in custody this time, or will he be allowed to go off again?
Now, you ask, first, we want an independent justice system, and you want me to predict what the justice system would do. Now, look, let me just say, I repeat one thing again. It is in the interest of Pakistan that we do not allow any armed militias in our country. We have suffered. The country has suffered sectarian attacks. We have had the worst situation. It has affected our investment. Pakistan has not, it has destabilized us. This whole thing, Pulwama, what happened in February last year, it was clearly an indigenous thing. It was a Kashmiri boy radicalized by the brutality of the security forces. He blew himself up. But because this group claimed responsibility, which was in India as well, Jaish-e-Mohammed was operating in India, but Pakistan suddenly came in the limelight. So even before this had happened, we had already decided that we would disarm all militant groups in Pakistan. And it is in Pakistan's interest, I repeat, it's in our interest, because the country has had enough of militant groups. You know, we had ethnic groups, militant groups. We had, in Balochistan, we still have militant groups operating. Then we had these various religious groups. So there is a decision now, and by the way, it is across the party. Every political party has signed the National Action Plan. Pakistan is now determined, and you know, normally it was said that the security forces patronize the groups. The security forces, we would not be disarming them if the security forces were not standing behind us. You cannot disarm because the police is incapable of disarming these groups. They are trained. I mean, these people have experience of fighting in Afghanistan, some in Kashmir. The police cannot go after them. So it's the army that is helping us disarm all militant groups in our country.
Mr. Prime Minister, you have been very generous with your time. We have so many more questions that we won't be able to get to. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. But before we close, I want to ask one last question, which is, this is your first visit here as Prime Minister. We have a very distinguished audience here of policymakers, people in and out of government, people who care deeply about the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. What final message would you like to leave as a closing thought for everyone?
I would like to, my message from my trip, first trip as the Prime Minister to the US, I would like to have a relationship between the two countries of mutual trust. I would like to have a relationship as equals of friendship, not as it has been before, where Pakistan has sort of been, you know, it's like Pakistan wanting aid from the US, and then as for aid, Pakistan is expected to do certain things. The reason why I'm happy leaving the US this time, because we have a relationship now based on a mutual interest, which is peace in Afghanistan. And, you know, someone asked that, will you get this funds? I hate the idea that we would be asking for funds, not US, from anyone. Because aid has been one of the biggest curses for my country. What it has done is, it has created the dependency syndrome. We have become, you know, when I went on my first trip to Saudi Arabia, I came back, what have you got from there? As if I'd gone there to beg for money. And I think it's humiliating for a country. Countries rise because of self-respect and self-esteem. No countries rise by begging and borrowing for money. So my relationship with the US would be, I would like a relationship with, a dignified relationship with the US, where never again should we ever have that humiliating phase. I can tell you as a Pakistani, never did I feel more humiliated when Osama bin Laden was taken out in Pakistan by the US troops. Never did I feel more humiliated, because here was a country which was supposed to be an ally, and our ally did not trust us. So as a Pakistani, for every Pakistani it was humiliating. We never want to be in that same position again. We want to have a relationship of friendship. And it doesn't matter, you know, friend can be rich and the other can not be so rich. But so what? You know, it's about a dignified relationship, and that's what I hope to have to the US.
like to present you with a small token of our appreciation for your visit
Thank you,
here.
Nancy.
Invite you to come back and wish you all the best. Please join me in thanking the Prime Minister.
Thank you.